Today we're going to talk about a topic. My thoughts, or one of my thoughts during the time off, has been thinking about thinking. That sounds silly, right? But a new way of thinking, and I have to admit that part of this happened as I slow down, from work in ministry, if you want, and that's so interesting. Even creating spaces to be aware of the state of my own soul. I just noticed that as I slow down and I have more time, I found my thoughts very confusing, very, uh, in a way, I would say, misaligned with God. I found myself having to deal a little bit with my thoughts. So that's what I thought this would be I would share today. So a new way of thinking. Let me start with this scripture. So it's a scripture that we all know, and I'm sure it is familiar for all of us. Romans 12:2. Here the invitation is to this: don't change yourselves to be like the people of this world, but let God change you inside with a new way of thinking. Then you will be able to understand and accept what God wants for you. You will be able to know what good and pleasing to Him, what is good and pleasing to Him, and what is perfect. This is a famous passage that talks about transformation, and I'm almost sure that many of us could quote it by heart, right? And part of the reality of this passage for me is that every time that I talk with people, either in spiritual direction or counseling, I'm very aware to the fact that there is always a genuine desire to change in people. And this is one of those passages that we all say, yes, right? This is what I want. I want to transform my mind, not to be conformed to this world. I want to, to let God help my thinking, right? And I want to know the will of God for me that is good and is perfect. So the desire is genuine. I don't have any doubt of it. But I'm also present to the genuine struggle. Saying that is easier than doing that. And we struggle with our thoughts. In my little experience as I went on vacation, I discovered how many times I found myself in patterns of thought that were not very helpful. Comparing, judging, counting. I had this little motto after my vacation, and this is that counting is not good for my soul. I was just aware how much I'm counting things. And I don't have an iWatch or an iFit. I'm not counting my steps, right? Many people are. I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm counting. I'm taking kind of trying to strive with control. Part I guess, of my job is relating a bit with social media. And believe me, don't hear any condemnation or judgment on social media from me. That's not my heart. But I just notice how much the social media experience for me becomes an experience in a way of counting, of counting opinions or the faith walking thing. I have to see how the posts are doing, so I'm counting. And Facebook is perfect because they count everything. And oh my gosh, I just noticed how unhelpful that is for my soul, right? And because my thoughts were around counting. So here we are. I want to have a way of thinking that is deeper, that brings me to a place of communion with God, and I find kind of the automatic way of thinking that is, in my case, about counting. And yeah, counting is per se, it's not about it, but it's judging, it's comparing, it's measuring things. And there are things that we need to measure. I get it, but it's not good for my soul. So, what to do? what to do. We can say that the invitation of Jesus, in a way, for all of us, is an invitation to think differently. That's the passage that we just read, right? To think differently. Jesus is inviting us to see things in a different way. I always see how he is in his teaching. He had authority, but he brought this gospel, this message that was different to the way that was understood at that time. And it's not only about thinking different, but I think it's about seeing differently. Because this is the problem of thinking for me. Um, when I start thinking, I become very conceptual, right? I become a little bit esoteric, and the ideas and the thoughts, and all that is good. I mean, there's a place for that. But the thinking about the present moment, the thinking about the judgment that I'm doing right now. So you see, thinking happens in the present moment and is very incarnated, not only as a concept. This is not about ideas in a book. The thinking that Jesus invited me is not about concepts, but it is about a way of seeing things and somehow thinking differently in the present moment. I don't know if this makes sense. Is a thinking that incarnates in the present moment and sees the person that is in front of me in a different way, therefore I can think of this person in a different way. You remember the passage, right? We all think or see Jesus in a different way, but after the gift of the Holy Spirit, after Christ himself, we can see him, relate to him in a different way, and we can see and think ourselves in a different way. So thinking and seeing is my best effort to sort of incarnate or bring this thinking gift that we have received from God to our here and now present moment. That's what Jesus wants me to. He's not waiting for us at, I don't know, the door of eternity and say, okay, give me your best thoughts. And I read all your podcasts or your blog posts or whatever, and there's a test even to see if doctrine is good. It doesn't work that way. It is the incarnation of the thinking that moves somehow Jesus to respond in different ways. And I will add to this that the invitation of Jesus is not only to think differently, but to see differently, and not only to see differently, but to see beyond what is apparent. And this is my best effort to express this, to integrate and transcend. So the problem with thinking and seeing different too is that in some way we become polarized, us and them, right and wrong. So this is not the thinking that Jesus is inviting us to think. He's really not inviting us to have kind of a group of people and somehow to separate us. And yes, he invites us to separate us in a way from the world. But you see, there's a huge paradox. He invites us to love our enemy. So think about that. How is that, right? Love our enemy, it just tears down all my ideas of polarization, because in polarization, what I do is I make enemies in a way, right? Me and them, us and them, and we have to somehow conquer. But Jesus calls us to love our enemies, right? And to love those who persecute us. So I like, this is a concept of a philosopher called Ken Wilber that talks about the integration and transcending. And it has to do a lot with contemplation. I believe that only the thinking that allows to integrate and transcend enemies and suffering and challenges of world takes place not in a conceptual, intellectual part, but it takes place in a contemplative space, in a communion when things and paradoxes somehow make peace. And this is the work of Jesus, and I believe the work of God. So a new way of thinking is not only you have to think biblically. Yes, you do have to think biblically, but it's not only about right and wrong biblically. It is seeing with the eyes of Jesus and integrating and transcending what is in front of me apparent. That I can tell nature. Nature is, I can relate with nature as something that I can use or something that is beautiful, or I can relate with nature as I am in nature. This is part of me. There is a harmony that takes place in nature. And I think Jesus saw the world this way. I think that is the gift of the Spirit, the eyes that Jesus talks about. Uh, we have and we don't use all the time, right? See with His eyes. So let me try to put this in the context of some biblical passages. I have only three, but this is a classic, and I was thinking of seeing differently and thinking differently. I love this little passage in Second Kings when Elisha and the servant, having this little account. This is one of those Bible passages that kids love, and I love it in a way, right? So here they are. The king of Aram is persecuting them, and they have this adventure, right? And the passage reads this way. Elisha's servant got up early that morning. When he went outside, he saw an army with horses and chariots all around the city. The servant said to Elisha, "Oh, my master, what can we do?" Elisha said, "Don't be afraid. The army that fights for us is larger than the army that fights for Aram." Then Elisha prayed and said, "Lord, I ask you, open my servant's eyes so that he can see." The Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and the servant saw the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire. They were all around Elisha. What a beautiful Bible study is this, and really. So here you have this thinking and seeing connected. Obviously, the anxiety, we can go into module 3 of faith walking, right? The anxiety of the servant is triggered, and all his thoughts are going to come there, and his reactions, because he is not seeing correctly. And this is not about theology, right? This is a very present reality. My gosh, they are going to kill us. And then you have Elisha into this place of connection, communion. He's able to see beyond what is apparent. And the prayer, right? And this is available for you and me, I believe, because it was available, right, for the servant of Elijah. The prayer of Elijah, God granted that. How much more it would be available for you and me, with intercession of Jesus, to see things in a different way, so we can think accordingly. Okay, so that's one Old Testament. Then Matthew 6:22 and 23, right? This is in the context in Matthew of the Sermon of the Mountain. And you can tell that Jesus in the Sermon of the Mountain, all that he's doing is inviting us to see and to think differently, right? So your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep the darkness is. How do I see things? How healthy is my eye? Let's put it that way. My spiritual eye is directly connected with this darkness or this light inside of me. And I can tell you, I talk with a lot of people in counseling, and this is very true. You look, you see what somehow what you have inside. Jesus tells us to see in a healthy way. Romans 8:6 is the passage that we use for silence. Letting your sinful nature, this is the New Living Translation, letting your sinful nature control your mind leads to death, but letting the Spirit control your mind leads to life and peace. And that's another passage that says, I really want this, Lord. How can I let the Spirit to control my mind, right? And sinful flesh, all that language is not only moral. Sin is not more. I'm gonna say this way: it's not only moral misalignment with God. I can see this pandemic in a way that is more sinful or misaligned with God, because I'm not seeing what God is doing. Right? I'm like Elijah's servant saying, "Oh my gosh, we're gonna die. We're gonna die." What is the movie of the little chicken that says the sky is falling, right? Or I can have a different approach and see things in a different way, right? final passage in Corinthians. This is Paul 2. For the weapons of our warfare are not the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. This passage raises a couple of notches the thing. We talk about spiritual warfare, it talks about a fight. And again, when you talk with somebody in counseling who's struggling with the thoughts, you see that this is a real fight. And I believe there is a spiritual element for sure. But here's, that somehow we take every thought captive, right? How in the world we do that? How we do that? And here is where I love, and I believe is a space that I am very comfortable. The overlap between the spiritual journey, spirituality, the classic spirituality, and we have learned through tradition of those followers of Christ that were before of us, and all the psychology and psychotherapy and counseling that comes, and they overlap because they are talking or they are trying to deal with the same element, the human soul. So how can we think differently? I don't pretend to give you the best answer, but I'm going to try to do and offer my thoughts. I believe that the first thing that we need to do to think differently is to acknowledge that it is a cooperation with God. We don't do it alone. And this might seem so simple, but every time I catch myself with this illusion of separation, this illusion that God and I are separated and I do things independently from God, and I can do it, that I can bear fruit alone. So I have to come back to this reality that thinking differently, it is not a matter of willfulness. It's not only my excellent discipline to do it, but it's a matter of a divine cooperation with God, in which it becomes a desire. I'm going to say it this way. It becomes a pain. It becomes like a thirst. Oh my gosh, this hurts. Oh my gosh, I'm thirsty. Oh my gosh, I want. So this pain reveals a desire, a longing. Lord, I really want this. Lord, I really want this. I want this more than I want a new iPhone. I want this more. It becomes getting all those things above is a real desire. It is not just normal desire, surface desire. And for that, it becomes a little pain. And it becomes prayer. So it becomes like a pain, it becomes a desire and a longing, and eventually becomes prayer. And I believe that is the prayer that starts this movement and this cooperation with God. So the beginning is very different. It's not a plan for a new practice, but it becomes the being present to or being aware of the impact of that desire, that possibility in me. I think that to think differently, then we need to acknowledge that is the different way of thinking. Yeah, we see beyond, we integrate and transcend. So this is a place where I have a choice, right? It's gonna be different than than my family thinks. It's gonna be different than my friends thinks in a way. I cannot expect all society to conform. The passage of Romans 12 says, "Don't be conformed." I love the message version of it. Don't don't make a life that's so easy for you just to fit in, right? So there is a resistance. There is some level of tension that probably is the best word between thinking differently, God's way, and thinking as most of the culture thinks. And I don't know for you, but that is a big deal for me because it is like the air conditioning. I don't feel it, but it's cooling the environment. So in the same way, cultural thinking, or I would even say Christian thinking, right, as more like an organization, just impacts me and influences me more than I think. And Jesus lived in a very religious culture, right? But his thinking was different. And it happens to be different than the religious leaders. And I'm not saying that we have to think differently, we have to be, no, I'm just saying he had to deal with a sifting, right? And this thinking differently is a sifting in me too. I have to be aware that this is a different thinking and is beyond and integrates and transcends. Finally, I think that we have to acknowledge that this way of thinking is not purely intellectual. Yeah, I mentioned that before. It is a practice that we experience in the present. It is the incarnation of the mind of Christ in us. So this new way of thinking doesn't have the goal of intellectual, accomplishment. It's not about being a scholar. It's not even about wisdom. I mean, you can say, yeah, it is about wisdom, but this is not about attaining anything intellectually. But this new way of thinking is about being different. It's an experiential thing. And in Faith Walking, we love this idea. We believe that information is helpful, but does not transform. We need experiences. So how our thinking becomes experience. So there you have three ideas. How can we think differently? And still, I don't think I have answered anything, right? Because how in the world we do this? I believe that it is a practice, and as a practice, it has an element, it has a layer of willfulness. Again, yes, I have to get there, I have to start there, I have to put myself or do my homework, if you want. There are things that I need to do into it to create this practice, some work. In Faith Walking, we do a lot of that. We create the spaces, we create conversations, and you need some, logistics to get there, right? So there's part of it. But as a practice, also it takes patience. I believe those things are things that we will be practicing the rest of our lives. It's not that we get to one place and say, "Okay, I got it. I got the badge, right? Module 3, module 2, right? I got it. I got the authenticity." Not really. Everything starts kind of coming back to it. I love the idea that the practices, we talk about the information, practice, and experience, right? And that's one of the things in Faith Walking. And we think about that as a cycle. We offer information, we do some reflection, and we do some practice about that and homework, and we do some reflection. And we offer information, so we go in circle through it. But the circle is not static. The circle is not in the same level all the time. The circle actually goes like a spiral. It goes down. Repetition is not redundancy in the spiritual life. Repetition gets you deeper and deeper and deeper. So this is the kind of practice, the kind of incarnation that I believe Jesus is inviting us. So I'm going to offer two quotes that have been helpful. How is this different? This has been helpful for me to put examples. So Edith Eger is the writer of a book called The Choice. She was a survivor. She is a survivor of a concentration camp, and she is a psychotherapist. And it's a beautiful book, but she says this: our painful experiences aren't a liability, they are a gift. They give us perspective and meaning, an opportunity to find our unique purpose and our strength. So I like this. Is say that, in some level we all might agree with it. At the moment of the experience, nobody wants to have painful experiences, right? My pain is my teacher. There is an invitation of God for me to not cause suffering, to somehow diminish or be compassionate with suffering. But when suffering remains, suffering becomes my teacher. And this is something that we see in the life of Jesus. So that is very different. That is very different than the whole world is telling us. Painful is bad. Failure is bad. You have to be successful. You have to get there. So that's different. Are we willing to do this? And when we talk about painful, we also often say in Faith Walking that in Faith Walking, somehow we have to increase our capacity to sustain suffering. because we grow in that level. As much as we are willing to have more capacity for suffering in a way. There is no learning in this case, I believe, that is completely absent of suffering. So that's a different way of thinking. And that makes me, I guess, I hope, understand a little better what Paul is saying when he says, I have this thorn in my flesh, and I ask for God to take it out away, but it's staying. And therefore, I'm not going to boast on the good things, but I'm going to boast in this pain, right? This pain is my teacher, right? So it is different. There are so many quotes, I just chose two, but Brother Lawrence, a classic, right? The practice of presence of God. I love the simplicity. I have to come back to that book now and then. The simplicity, and yes, it's written kind of in all English and all that stuff, but he says this, thinking about a practice, right? He's referring to God. He does not ask much of us, merely a thought of him from time to time, a little act of adoration, sometimes to ask for his grace, sometimes to offer him your sufferings, at other times to thank him for the graces past and present he has bestowed on you, in the midst of your troubles, to take solace in him as often as you can. Lift up your heart to him during your meals and in company. The least little remembrance will always be the most pleasant to him. One need not cry out very loudly. He is nearer to us than we think. Now, I love that. When I read, these kind of words, yeah, I can do that. And I don't say that in a prideful way, but, I can have a different way. This is actually a different way of thinking. I don't need to think too high. It makes me think of Psalm 131. My eyes are not prideful. I'm not thinking. I'm just like a kid, a little child, weaned child, his mother's arms. So, okay, let me offer also this. I'm gonna go into this overlap of psychology and spirituality. Okay, so how can we, in a very pragmatical way, how can I start? What are good pointers for me to develop a practice around that? So CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, they are good. There are so many good things to learn. I love it. But they offer this ABC, right? There's a book, Learn Optimism, for example, that talks how you learn to think positively. I'm not talking we need to learn just to be optimists, but the essence of it is CBT. And they talk about adversities. You have to acknowledge your adversity. You have to awareness. You have to be aware of the moment in which anxiety comes, when things get triggered, right? Then they invite you to think of your beliefs. What do you believe? What are you taught? What is your internal dialogue? What are if you will write your internal dialogue, what are you telling to yourself? Oh, I'm a loser. Oh, I'm always late. There's no, the beliefs that are kind of this intellectual structure that happens inside of our minds. And they talk about consequences and how is that working pretty much, right? So that is CBT, right? ABC, adversities, beliefs, consequence. That is the essence in which they invite you to think of your thinking, right? So in field walking, we have done something like that, right? We talk about experiences. You have to experience your experiences. You have to be present to your experiences. There's a lot more to say than just experiences of the past and childhood. We do first formation work, but you think of your experiences even in the present, right? We talk about awareness, becoming aware of what is going on. And then we talk about meaning. That is the same way, it's kind of the same thing that beliefs. So how are you interpreting the experiences that you're living? So if you, if I was put the example, if I text you and you don't respond to me, what is the meaning that I give to the fact that you didn't text me back? And many possibilities. I can think that you are selfish, or I can think that I'm selfish, or there's not so many possibilities, but we all are meaning making machines. We are providing meaning, and that meaning comes from our past experiences and the worldview and how we understand the world. But we are aware of our meanings, not only of our experience, and then we consider the impact of our meanings. It's a different way to say the same thing that CBT. So we invite this awareness work into our present. How can we think differently? And then what do we do? And here's where I depart from CBT, right? CBT will tell you, well, how it's working, and there are several things that they invite you to do to dispute your thoughts and to energize your thoughts. And all that's helpful, that's great. But I believe that what we do is this. We present our beliefs and meanings to God. That is the way we present our thinking to God. We want to think differently. We have to start by presenting our present thinking to God. That is the light that we seek, and we listen. That this is the contemplative moment. We pause. We pause, because in that pause is when we give a space for God to feel the emptiness and giving us the response. And then we try to see through the eyes of Christ and through the filter of our guiding principles. I'm adding some faith walking language, because our guiding principles, in a way, are the same. I could say my guiding principles, they come from Christ. They're Christ-centered guiding principles. And finally, what we do is we choose. We choose how to think. And as we repeat this, here comes the practice part. We repeat this once and again and again. And we don't start by doing this perfectly. Just the contrary. We start by being aware of, oh my gosh, how many thoughts I have that are not pretty helpful. But as we present and persevere into this, knowing that God is with us, eventually things change. And they give us, even for a little, even if for a minute, the freedom to choose, or the gift to choose freely, not out of the obsessions of my mind or the all stories and meanings of my story, but out of the freedom of saying, I can choose. What do I think today? Even if 30 minutes later I find myself falling in the same trap, as I repeat this, I believe God works in us. Dr. Martin E.D. Seligman is the writer of that book of Learning Optimist. He says, well, you can't control your experiences, truth. You can control your explanations. You are in charge of your own meanings. Anyway, let me finish with this. Jenny Allen, Get Out of Your Mind, says, Paul tells us that when we take captive our thoughts, we can wield our power for good and for God, slaying strongholds left and right. What incredible power is available to us every moment on every day. That is very sobering for me. That is available. So let me stop there and invite you to participate, to share your thoughts, comments. What are you present to?
There were a couple of things that came up for me as you were teaching us this, and one is just at the very beginning of learning to think differently is about the importance of creating that space to simply listen and to think. And I know you've talked about this, and Faith Walking talks about this, but that is just, and not just in the beginning, but on a continual basis. And I mean, I think we'd all agree with that, just the fact that we're here today for meditation. But we can't really start a new way of thinking until we consider how we're thinking now and how that might not be in alignment with how Christ wants us to think. And the other thing that came up is that I'm so grateful that our sufferings bring fruit. And I thought about that one quote that you gave, that our painful experiences aren't a liability, they're a gift. And yeah, I think about that in Christ, and I think about how much suffering that we all go through, and how much that the world goes through, and how Paul talks about that in 2 Corinthians 2. It is a gift, because then we can comfort others with the comfort that he's given us. And I'm very grateful for that, because without the hope of knowing that the Lord's going to use that, it would be very, very depressing.
It will be, Trish, your spot right there. Only in that redemption of suffering, there is meaning that can sustain my soul.
Yes.
You know, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, talks about the meaning. We seek meaning. And he's also another survivor of concentration camps. And he talks about meaning is found in great love,
Yes.
great work, and in great suffering. It's pretty sobering.
I like that.
When you talk, Trish, about the pause, they say, I think Richard Rohr says that the change that changes everything is that pausing, is that listening, is that instead of doing, it's just talks about a lot of the rhythm. We are invited to live in the rhythm of a pause, of quietness, of silence, and action. So every action comes from a place of quietness. If not, imagine how horrible it would be.
I don't know if it's here or if it's in Faith Walk. I know this didn't come from me, but I've heard it referred to that what we're all experiencing in this pandemic is the great pause, worldwide. And I think, what's the invitation in that pause? The invitation is to think how we're living, think how we're doing, and all of that. Great pause.
It is. One analogy that comes, the pause, right? Like the pause of the diver. Have you seen the divers? Right? In the Olympics, when it's so cool to see them, right? But the diver, before diving, he pauses. And he pauses because in that pause, he centers. He remembers who he is. He knows what he's gonna do. Without that pause, he cannot dive well, right? So it's a beautiful example of we need that pause. That is a beautiful reminder.
Yeah, that pause, that's really helpful. I think in the last, like module 3, doing the anxiety work and realizing that I'm very good at writing a story and making meaning, and being like 5 or 6 chapters into my book before I realized that that's not the story, that's not what's happening at all. And that's been like just to be aware of that, and to now be catching myself before I get so far into the book, has been amazing. Like, just to stop, to pause, to think, okay, what's going on here? Is this me kind of making up some facts, or am I really going on what was true, what was said? What, rather than add my meaning to it, let's take that out, because I'm learning that I can quite easily put a negative meaning on anything, whereas that's not always the case. and quite often is not the case. And so just to take a moment to stop and even write down, like, this is fact, this is fiction. Where are you? What have you written into this that isn't actually happening or gonna happen? That's been one of the tools that I will always hold on to and come back to. And I found kind of what we've been talking about, but I found a quote this morning when I was sorting through some an old kind of notebook, and it says, "An arrow can only be shot by pulling it backwards. When life is dragging you back with difficulties, just imagine that it's going to launch you into something great." And I think at this time, when we do feel like we've either been stopped or kind of dragged back somewhere, there's something that God can do in us in this time, that when He kind of releases the arrow, it's on target. It's going to go straight to where it needs to go. And that for me is really powerful to think like, okay, God, do your best in me at this time in preparation for what would be when I don't have to spend all day at home. And that's like when there's freedom to go and do things. And I know that's happening now, that I know there's things that I can do now, but I do think that there's something that God's being very intentional about doing in each of us at this time.
That's great, Michelle. That's great. And you are so right. Yeah. That pause in the work of anxiety, that pause in the work of our lives, we're navigating through script, like how you say it, 6 chapters into my own book, I discovered that I was not the story. And we need to pause to come back to the present, because the past is past. And if we come back to the past, is to remember and to praise and to be grateful. The future is not yet here. We are so much trying to live into the future. We don't pause. And our souls thirst.
Marcus, I loved it that you told the story of Elisha. I love that story. And it just brought it back to me that how often I'm not seeing. And but then I had this vision of just that the Holy Spirit as a guide, just like, I thought about it like a blind person would have a guide, and show them the way. Only, he can cause us to see, just as he caused a blind man to see, but that he's guiding, and he can say, "See, look at this. Now look at this, and I want you to see this," and that was very comforting.
That's great. So, and I believe that is also exactly what we are seeking. The practice becomes that, an awareness, an attentiveness, meekness, to see what the Lord is inviting us to see. I believe that if we will have that freedom to really see it, the love of God compels us. That's real freedom. So it's great. Thank you. Thank you, Saul. Well, Laura, I don't know if you have any comment to do. You don't have to, but before we close, I want to give you the opportunity.
I've just been listening and I don't have any comments. I don't know if there's something wrong with my computer. It was kind of soft, so I was catching as much as I could. But I might have to hook up my Bluetooth speaker next time or something. It's dead now, but thank you for
Ah,
checking in with me, Marcos. I appreciate it.
okay, Laura, I'm sorry you couldn't get, but you can get back to the podcast too when we put this if you want. So
Yes, I think I'll go back and listen to the recording. I don't know why it was just soft today.
yeah, technology is great until it is not, right? Okay, well, it's right time. Let me read our little blessing. I believe that that is a blessing for all of us. And let us go. So, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Thank you.